Hello and welcome to Watch This Space. This is the first in a series of conversations about the future of wireless communications. I'm Brian Carney with Rivada Networks, and the first guest in this series is Declan Ganley, the chairman and CEO of Rivada. Declan, thanks for coming on today. Rivada is building a satellite communications network that it calls the Outernet. Can you just describe for people what that is, what it means, why you're doing it?
I can do that, but Brian, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I thought we were going to call it the Brian Carney Show, but it was decided that we weren't allowed to call it that. Brian vetoed that whole thing, and he said, no, it's going to be called Watch This Space. So, which is, I suppose, cleverer. But I did like the Brian Carney Show, and I will always think of this as the Brian Carney Show. But thanks for having me on as your first guest, Brian, on Watch This Space. Now, your question was, what is the Outernet? That was your question. Sorry, I was doing a weave there, but the Outernet is, it's something of a Marconi moment, insofar as that this will be the first time in history where you can have a direct point-to-point link of anywhere on the planet to anywhere else on the planet, and without having to go through somebody else's stuff. So the Outernet is distinct and separate from the internet. If you think about existing constellations, what they are doing is they are looking to dump you into the internet somewhere, to drop you off and put you into the internet. So you will have your signal that goes up from your terminal. It will go to the satellite. The satellite is then hunting for a ground relay station to land your signal. And once it finds that ground relay station, and it may use laser links in the process of trying to find you a ground relay station, hopping from one satellite to another, but it's ultimately looking to offload you and put you into the internet via a ground relay station. And once you're in the ground relay station, once you've been dropped off at the ground relay station, it's then you're then into the internet, you're on the subsea cables, you're being routed in the same way as other traffic is being routed to get to your end destination.
Let me stop you there for a second, because you said something that I think may surprise some people. We think of ourselves as living in a kind of a super connected world, right? We've got our phones, and feels like we have internet connections almost everywhere. Recently, Apple allowed Apple users to connect directly to satellites if they don't have a cell signal. So, but you're saying that the world is in some ways not as connected as we think it is? Is that what I hear you saying?
Probably that's actually a better way of putting it. It's because we say we live in this connected world. Yeah, we do. As long as you're connected to it, as long as you're in a place that has a connection. If you're in the middle of if you're at Point Nemo in the Pacific Ocean, you are not in a connected world. You have to be able to. The satellite that's even seeing you has got to be able to, you've got to be able to see the satellite, and then it's got to be able to reach a ground relay station somewhere to drop your signal off. And that has been a problem. And that has been a problem in recent years, not that anyone watching this is ever going to go to Point Nemo, but there are still parts of the planet where there is no coverage. We know that from even on aircraft Wi-Fi, where you will have spots that are blank, where you cannot get coverage for a variety of different reasons. So what
you mentioned to me, I think a while back, you were on a flight that went, on a polar flight path, and they kind of announced on the plane, because so much of that aircraft connectivity comes from geostationary satellites, and they have very poor coverage at the poles. that they basically said for the next 4 hours, the internet's going down because we can't get a signal.
I was
Which
on
is
a flight
interesting,
from,
right? People
yeah,
think of satellites as covering everything, but what you're describing is a situation where even if you can see the satellite has to see some piece of equipment on the ground to actually connect you somewhere else. And is what you're saying then that the Outernet doesn't need that ground relay station, so it's not limited by whether there's a ground relay station in range to provide you with the
exactly.
connection that you may need.
Exactly. The ground relay station is completely out of the equation. We don't care about it. We don't use them. It's, doesn't matter what it is. It might as well be an ice cream stall. It's irrelevant to what we are doing. Everybody else has got to find a ground relay station somewhere. The Outernet does not. The Outernet is taking your traffic from a terminal. It's taking it up to the satellite, the first satellite of the Outernet. It is then routing that traffic purely on the Outernet over the intersatellite links on the Outernet architecture and bringing it all the way to its end destination. If you've got a terminal at the other end, it will land you directly to that terminal. So you can have a pipe that is not some virtual private network, it's an actual private network. You go on nobody else's stuff. You don't pass through the brothels, as I think of them sometimes, as the brothels of the internet, where when you send your data, you do not know where it's been. You know it showed up at its destination at the end, but you have no idea where that data has been. You don't know who's got a copy of it. You don't know if it's been salt typhooned. It could have been anywhere, and it could have been routed anywhere. And having that complete end-to-end sovereignty of your data, that is where you know exactly where it's been, that it's always been in your possession, that it hasn't been copied or mirrored or dropped off somewhere else or duplicated. That is unique. It is new. And the ability to do, and what is utterly unique and new about that is being able to do that from any point on the planet to any other point or multi-points on the planet. Nobody can do that. That has not been done before. And people may think, and I know you're the one here that's supposed to be asking the questions, but people may say, well, what's the relevance of that? Why does it matter? Well, it's a long
I was
list.
going to ask you, and who is it for, right? I mean, who needs,
Right.
Is this something I'm going to, as a consumer, am I going to sign up for Outernet service?
I mean, you might, if you want to be really cool and you want to show off to your friends and let them know how vastly superior a connection you have, but probably not. So the customers for Outernet connectivity that it really matters to are government customers, people that care about security, care about data sovereignty, data security, data integrity, data residency, and not just governments, but of course, large enterprises that care about that sort of thing. So what are those kind of large enterprises? There will be the banking and finance sector, oil and gas sector, pharmaceutical sector, the software sector, the cloud service providers, people that need absolute guaranteed connectivity, that want to have an alternative route other than the internet. So if the internet goes down, that they have an alternative, but and may have will have a myriad of uses for their own customers that they want to apply it to. Rivada, for its Outernet, for our Outernet, we're a pure wholesaler. We will have, if we have 2,000 customers, that will be a lot. If you think about something like Starlink, which is a global broadband LEO, low Earth orbit satellite service provider, which is providing internet to everybody, right. They're going to have 1 billion plus users eventually. We maybe will have 2,000. Now, our customers will have millions and millions of users potentially, but we, for the Outernet, will not. Now, that all said, if somebody, let's say you're some kick-ass super gamer in Argentina that wants to play whatever is the latest cool game with some kick-ass super gamer in London or in Tokyo, or you want to play a bunch of people around the planet where latency, where the ping rate really matters. You know, if you're one of these esports players that's making, you know, X million bucks a year, yeah, you'll probably invest in getting an Outernet connection because it probably is worth it to get the game on the latency and the ping rate.
Sure, there the latency is everything. But I mean, that's frankly, that's an edge case, right? What we're really talking about here is we're talking about multinational enterprises. You know, you mentioned
high-frequency
banks.
Traders. Yeah.
I think about, you know, oil services companies. People don't realize how much data an offshore oil platform churns out. And, you know, at least what I understand is that right now they load a bunch of that stuff onto physical media and take it off the platform, you know, on a ship or a helicopter, whatever it is, depending on how far out at sea they are. And with this, they could transmit that data directly back to Texas or Saudi Arabia, wherever their headquarters is, without it passing through any other jurisdictions, without having to deal with, do they have coverage in the middle of the ocean, and so on.
And even where they do have some remote or connectivity for data, it could be fiber. They can be fiber pulled to those platforms. They can be other radio frequency connectivity to those platforms. As I understand it, the way that this data is gathered and managed, they have to have multiple they have to replicate the infrastructure in multiple instances around the world for different operations. Whereas if you have an Outernet, Outernet connectivity and you're one of those majors, your oil platform off Alaska or onshore in Alaska can be networked directly with your platforms in the Gulf of Mexico and your platforms in the Persian Gulf and your platform in the middle of Saudi Arabia. They can all be monitoring and connected with ultra low latency in real time with direct connections, which I understand means that you are not going to have to replicate all of the IT infrastructure in multiple instances around the world, which is going to provide enormous savings for an operator like that. Now, that's just one instance, right? But you know, and for government users, you know, think about from a diplomatic service standpoint. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, and I have to say, this was one of the things that really fascinated me as a young fellow. I was always fascinated with emergency communications and police communications. I used to build my own radios. But an uncle of mine lived in West Hendon in London, and used to go up to the top of his street and turn right to head down to what became Cricklewood Broadway. It was near Staples Corner. And just before you came to Staples Corner in London, to the left, near the police training center in Hendon, was the then East German Embassy. And the East German Embassy had this massive antenna and all of this wireless infrastructure and cables and everything sticking up into the London skyline, or the North London skyline at the time. And it fascinated me. And, you know, goodness knows what the East Germans were up to. I'm sure it wasn't anything particularly good. But when you think about, you know, how embassies need to connect for their secure information and conveying that information, Outernet connectivity to an embassy and to a diplomatic service is going to be extraordinarily useful, because it is going to be able to protect that data sovereignty, that data residency, and keep their traffic secure. And
sure, and that goes to your point about data sovereignty. If you're a sovereign entity, you have a embassy in whether it's a hostile or just an untrustworthy neighborhood, you can't be sending stuff over the local fiber network. You don't know where it's going to go. It's subject to interception, interdiction. And yeah, as you said, historically, they might have a giant dish there, but also historically, right? I know I always did. I think other people probably do associate satellite with kind of slow, sometimes unreliable, right? That sort of the sat phone at sea, for example, was always a thing that, you'd be lucky to make a call. People were paying for kilobits of information, and maybe they could send a couple of emails. What kind of speeds is the Outernet, the kind of pokey 24 baud kind
No,
of thing that,
no, no, no. This is an Ethernet. This is like plugging an Ethernet cable into whatever it is you're plugging it into. It's Ethernet speeds. They call not to get jargony, but an MPLS network. This is a ultra high, not only ultra high speed. It will be the fastest network on the planet at any distance over 2,300 kilometers. It will not be physically possible to be faster than it, even with a direct fiber connection.
Can you explain that? I think that
Yes,
would surprise some people.
So if you want the fastest possible direct connection between you and I, so I'm in Ireland, you're in Maine today.
Right.
I think you're in Maine today.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how far that is, but it's far. So
3,000 miles, let's say.
There you go.
So
the fastest way for you and I to be connected now, and we're not connected this way, we're connected via the internet, but would be to have a dedicated fiber from where I am in Ireland going directly to where you are in Maine. Direct point-to-point fiber. That would be the fastest way of doing it. Now, the reality is that, there's almost no instance where, even for a very large enterprise, it pays to have a direct point-to-point fiber. And you certainly can't have one where you can randomly remove the two ends to any other point of the planet. So so that's the fastest way to connect right now. Once the Outernet is turned on, there will be a faster way, which is for me to have a terminal here where I am in Ireland that connects to a satellite at 1,050 kilometers above where I'm sitting. It will then hit the Outernet. The Outernet will then route that traffic from one Outernet satellite to another, and it will land it right where you are. If you have a terminal, to the terminal that's that's on in your building, and at that point, that creates a direct Outernet connection between you and I. The traffic is traveling in the following manner. It's going in the RF of the Ka band, the radio frequency, from my terminal up to the first satellite. Okay. It's then on a laser, so that one of the lasers on the satellite will then connect to a laser connector on a satellite in an adjacent plane, and that will then connect via a laser to another satellite in the adjacent plane until it gets to a satellite that can see your terminal, and then it will land again using the radio frequency from that 1,050 kilometer distance. It will land it at your terminal. Now, what's going on here? At the RF, you're at near light speed, and I'm going up 1,050 kilometers. So that's a dog leg, okay? It's a dog leg vis-a-vis the direct fiber connection from me to you.
Right.
But once it's in space, it's in a near vacuum, and it's on a laser light beam, and putting information through a laser beam in a near vacuum is faster. Light goes faster through a laser beam than it does through a fiber optic cable.
Through that glass cable, okay.
Right, because of physics. So light through glass, light through a fiber is, I think it's 30% slower than light through a pure laser in a near vacuum. So once you've gone that 1,050 kilometers up, now you're moving faster over and even though you've got a hop on each satellite, it adds minimal delay. So,
Right. Okay.
And the trade-off is at about 2,300 kilometers is where you start to see the tortoise that's having to go up by the dog leg overtakes the hare at about 2,300 kilometers, or I should say the hare really takes over the tortoise, so bypasses the tortoise. So the tortoise is the fiber optic link. The hare, in this case, blows past it at about 2,300 kilometers. And any distance greater than that, the advantage grows.
That's super interesting. So are there applications that, maybe I'm not thinking of, or viewers haven't thought of for this kind of connectivity that you think they should know about? I'm trying to think of ways in which that kind of connectivity could be used. I guess one thing that I would ask about is shipping, for example. Are we going to be able to drive autonomous freight ships with this kind of thing?
Yes. So think about an autonomous ship going at speed, and you want to steer it to avoid an iceberg, and the iceberg is spotted late, or something is surfacing. You've seen something on the surface, and the ship, and for some reason you want to remotely be able to make a decision to steer or avoid that thing. The latency at that point matters. So when
clearly latency is all important.
Hard to stern. I want to go hard to stern, and basically I'm spinning the wheel from Ireland, and I'm trying to go hard to stern to avoid the iceberg. I want the rudder to be moving immediately as I'm turning the wheel, and that's going to make the difference of whether or not you hit the iceberg, right? If you're very, very close. And look, you can apply that to esports, you can apply it to all sorts of government applications, but when it comes to remote and automated and autonomous vehicles, if they're flying in the air, it's even more important, right? Because they're moving at speed. If you've got something that's going at supersonic speed and you want to be able to control it remotely, so you're saying it's semi-autonomous. I actually want to be able to make decisions from the other side of the planet to direct that aircraft that's flying at supersonic speed. Latency is extremely important in that situation. If I want to, whatever decision it is that I want to make. If I'm a high frequency trader and I'm a high frequency trading algorithm, and I want to buy one thing and sell another, high frequency traders pay different levels of rent depending on how close they are on a rack to these systems. They'll pay to be in a data center that is closer to the exchange than one that's further away. This is a game changer in that area.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because in certain kinds of financial trading, milliseconds definitely matter. Although, as you said, often they're trying to position themselves physically closer, but maybe there are ways that they can effectively get closer if they can speed up their transmission rates. So certainly an interesting potential application. I'm sure we could go on multiplying applications for a long time, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Is there anything else?
I want to give one other example, Brian, if you don't mind. Sorry, the latency was kicking in there. That's because we're connected to the internet. For example, something like this: if you're a a big broadcaster, that lag that we're all used to, it's the studio is talking to Ed Winchester. Hey, Ed, what do you think of the election? And Ed sits there on the camera like this. And then you get that lag that we're all used to.
Right.
Ed Winchester is going to hear the question and be able to answer it without making you impatient or wondering if your screen is frozen. But the cloud providers, the Outernet is something else for them, because in addition to being able to provide those speeds and the advantages that we've talked to, there is also the redundancy issue, because every single cloud provider is completely dependent on the subsea cable infrastructure.
Right.
And there's about just over 530 subsea cables on the planet, and you can look them up. I mean, they're on the internet. These are not secret things. They're also really, you can't hide them, right? They sit on the seafloor, and you can't hide them. There's just over 530 of them, and global redundancy for data centers is having another subsea cable connection.
Right.
Instead of being dependent on one, you have two. So you can, go around Africa or go around Asia or go around wherever it might be. The issue with air is if the Houthis or some state or non-state actor decides to Nord Stream pipeline your subsea cable, and that's a lot easier to do that than it is to take out the Nord Stream pipeline, as we saw happened not so long ago.
Right.
That's going to make all those cloud service providers completely dark. That the whole internet can be taken down, and you can do that with knocking out a far smaller number than 530 of those subsea cables.
So are you saying that the Outernet could survive even if the internet was somehow inaccessible? You could still use the service?
Yes, I'm very much saying that. So the Outernet is not dependent upon the internet. It can connect to it. If you want it to connect to it, it will. But if you don't want to touch the internet and you want to have global connectivity, and you want global connectivity that will survive a collapse of the internet, this will absolutely do it, because it fundamentally avoids the whole thing. And that's the Marconi-like moment, right? So somebody goes around and blows, half the subsea cables in the world, which could happen over a space of 2 minutes if some state actor decides that it's in their interest to do that, or some non-state actor decides that it's in their interest to do that. The Outernet will keep on working. Yes, it will.
Yeah, no, I like this image, your Marconi image, because sometimes technology advances show us that there are gaps that we didn't know existed in our world, right? Like getting a letter across the Atlantic in 5 days seemed impossibly fast in the 19th century. And then once you prove that you could do long distance wireless communication, you could transmit a message between certain points, at least in a matter of minutes, using Morse code or whatever they were doing back then initially. And suddenly the world, in a way, got much smaller, right? Information started to travel much faster, and we've continued to increase those speeds, and we've continued to increase the number of places you can get those connections. But we're almost blind to all of the ways in which it's still slow, right? Your example of the guy out in the field, and they ask him a question, and we all sit there and watch him for 3 seconds while the message wends its way through whatever network it is, and then he hears the question and answers the anchor in the studio. Or all of the places in which we still don't have connectivity, and where they are never going to lay fiber optic cables, either because you're kind of in the mountains the way I am, or you're just in the middle of nowhere, or you're in the ocean and you're mobile and there's no, it has to be wireless. And we feel so connected, But people in the 19th century probably felt like, getting a letter from London to New York in less than a week was a kind of miracle, right? And
Right.
the limits of it only became apparent once the possibility of doing it much, much faster than that became a reality.
Yeah, my dad tells a story about when he was very young in rural Ireland. So this would have been in the 1950s, early 1950s in rural East County Galway. And electrification came to rural Ireland much later than it did to other parts of Europe. And Ireland was very much, rural Ireland was kind of like third world in some, certainly from an infrastructure standpoint back in those days. And he tells a story of watching the electrical poles coming over the hill that was visible from his village, and how excited people were about it in this rural community. But he said the electrical wires came into the village, and the first thing that everybody got was one light bulb, and that was it, because it's like, it was okay. It's better than the candles, right? Or that's not the candles, but the paraffin lamps that they used. And it's like, let's put a light bulb in. And then it occurred to them that, if I put a plug, a power outlet on, I can plug in a radio, a big wireless. And then the first refrigerator came, and there was a neighbor, they're all dead now, God rest them, but a neighbor, I won't say his name, but in a little thatched cottage, and he was very opposed to the refrigerator being put into the house, because he told his wife that she wouldn't be happy until she burned the house down, that these were all risks that they didn't need to take on, that the electric light was enough. And so adoption and understanding the impact and the uses that we can put new things to can take a while, and the Outernet is a game changer, and it is going to enable I think it'll enable whole new industries, actually. But if I was to sit here and tell you what they all were, I'd get probably most of them wrong. I know
Sure.
the
In the
industries
same
that
way that
exist.
those neighbors in Ireland probably couldn't imagine all of the way, when they got that light bulb, they thought, okay, we have maximized the possibilities here, right? And then the refrigerator and the idea of a wireless radio, never mind a TV, right? At every stage of development, we often feel, well, yes, we've done it all. And just like we feel, I keep going back to this idea, I think it's a really powerful one. We feel so connected, right? It's hard to imagine all of the ways in which we are not yet. And
I was in the Aer Lingus lab. This, you're reminding me. So I can't remember what year. So let me think. What year would it have been? It was early, the early noughties. So it was certainly before 2007, 2008. It was before that. I can't remember. Was it the end of the 90s? Was it the early 2000s? But there was an Irish MEP, a member of the European Parliament, and he was quite young and considered, to be kind of cool at the time. Again, he's dead now. And I met him I bumped into him in the Aer Lingus lounge in Heathrow Airport. I was flying back to Ireland from London, and he was in London as well. But I sat down, I was having a cup of tea and started chatting with him. And I was talking about how excited I was about data over wireless, and that was coming. And the potential for it. And he said, no one's going to use it. There's what are people going to be doing with data? They don't need it. We've got voice. And that's, if you want to do data, you'll go to your computer and you'll do that stuff. You're not going to do it while you're on the move. Right. And he was a smart guy. And it wasn't available. I had one of those Nokia, the very first Nokia phone. It wasn't a flip phone, but it was a big phone that opened up and there was a screen on it.
The communicator, right?
The Nokia communicator. And I got one of the first Nokia communicators. And I was in London, and I was on the phone to a hedge fund manager in Manhattan, in downtown Manhattan. And I told him about this communicator. and that I could receive a fax on that Nokia communicator. He said, I don't believe it. No way. And I said, look, I am here. I said, send me a fax. And I was in an airport. I'd spent so much of my life in airports. I can't remember which London airport I was in, but I had time to kill. So he sent this fax, and it must have taken 15 bloody minutes for this fax to come through on the Nokia communicator, but it did. And I read out to him the fax, and he was blown away that I received a fax on a mobile phone. That was just wild, to a hedge fund manager in New York that year. So it's, we could give loads of examples, and all people that are watching this will know their own, but the Outernet is gonna do the same. It's gonna have the same game-changing effect. I think it'll be bigger because the geographical impact of this, the stuff it's going to be allowed you to do from anywhere, it's really exciting.
Well, it is exciting. Listen, Declan, thank you. I think we could go on all day, but this won't be our last conversation about it, and I'm sure there's more to discuss. But I want to wrap it here so that we keep this a reasonable length for viewers. And thank you for your time. And yeah, the Outernet does sound like a game changer. I'm excited. I know you're excited. Let's keep talking. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, Brian.